In March 2017, Nintendo launched a masterpiece. The Nintendo Switch was engineered to be an absolute multi-billion-dollar portable fortress. It was designed from the ground up to wipe out the piracy ghosts of Nintendo's past, the mod chips, the custom firmware, the homebrew channels that had dismantled the Wii and the Nintendo DS. This time, Nintendo wasn't playing around. They built a modern, encrypted, sandboxed ecosystem. But the thing that completely brought it to its knees wasn't a sophisticated cyber attack by a nation-state threat actor. It wasn't an elite team of underground software engineers pulling off a multi-million-dollar digital heist. It was a standard 5-cent metal paperclip. No software bypasses, no complex network vulnerabilities, just a piece of twisted office wire slid down a plastic controller rail. And the most terrifying part for Nintendo? They couldn't patch it. No firmware update, no emergency code deployment, no software wall could ever fix the flaw. Because Nintendo hadn't just made a mistake in their code, they had physically manufactured the defect into millions of devices, already sitting at retail shelves and in living rooms across the world. They had minted their own vulnerability in raw silicon. If you want to see exactly how a multi-billion-dollar empire got completely outsmarted by literal office supplies, take a quick second to hit that subscribe button right now. We tear apart the world's most fascinating tech exploits, corporate cover-ups, and cybersecurity history right here every single week. And since we're launching this brand new channel entirely from scratch, your support on this video sets the foundation for everything we build next. Now, let's step inside the hardware and look at the multi-billion-dollar gamble that started it all. To understand why the Switch fell so spectacularly, we have to look back at the corporate panic of 2016. Nintendo was backed into a corner. Their previous console, the Wii U, was a catastrophic commercial disaster. It had completely alienated third-party developers, confused the mainstream public, and sold just over 13 million units in its entire lifespan. For context, the original Wii sold over 100 million. Sony's PlayStation 4 was completely dominating the market. Nintendo's financial reserves were draining, and their entire reputation as a hardware titan was riding on their next project, a hybrid console codenamed NX, which would become the Switch. Nintendo needed to design, test, manufacture, and ship a revolutionary piece of gaming hardware in record time. But hardware development is slow, and building custom processors from scratch takes years of prototyping and billions of dollars in R&D. So, Nintendo made a massive, high-stakes strategic gamble. Instead of engineering a custom graphics and processing architecture in-house, they decided to outsource the brain of the machine. They turned to Silicon Valley and bought an off-the-shelf system-on-a-chip from Nvidia, the Tegra X1. On paper, it was a brilliant partnership. The Tegra X1 was incredibly powerful for its size, highly efficient, and already being mass-produced for Nvidia's own Android TV boxes and tablet projects. By using existing silicon, Nintendo skipped years of development, slashed production costs, and guaranteed they could hit their March 2017 launch window. But off-the-shelf components come with off-the-shelf realities. The Tegra X1 wasn't a bespoke chip built uniquely for Nintendo's proprietary security model. It was a general-purpose processor designed to be flexible. And buried deep down inside the microscopic architecture of that Nvidia chip was a hidden blind spot, a ticking logistical time bomb that Nintendo's engineers completely overlooked in their rush to market. Every single computer processor on Earth needs a starting point. The absolute microsecond you press the power button, a tiny spark of electricity travels to the chip, and the processor needs to know what to do first. It can't read your operating system yet because it hasn't loaded the storage drives or initialized the system memory. To solve this, chip makers etch a tiny, fundamental piece of code directly into the physical wiring of the silicon chip itself. This is called the BootROM. Think of the BootROM as the primeval DNA of the console. It wakes up before anything else, executing the initial raw hardware instructions and running basic cryptographic checks to ensure that the operating system it's about to load is genuine, unaltered, and signed by Nintendo. Because this code is physically embedded into the read-only memory gates of the silicon wafer at the factory, it is completely permanent. It cannot be rewritten. It cannot be edited. It is fundamentally unchangeable. No internet download, no system update, and no emergency software patch can ever alter a single line of the BootROM code. If there is a mistake in that code, that mistake will exist exactly as it is for the rest of the physical life of that chip. And Nvidia's engineers had left a devastating loophole right in the center of their BootROM architecture. To keep the chip secure, Nvidia built an emergency backdoor for their own factory technicians. If a piece of hardware got corrupted during assembly or failed a software update in the wild, engineers needed a way to resurrect the dead chip. On the Tegra X1, this emergency protocol was called USB Recovery Mode, or RCM. When you forced the chip into recovery mode, it bypassed the standard operating system and waited for an external computer to send a data packet, a payload, over a physical USB cable. Now, Nvidia wasn't foolish. They knew hackers would try to abuse this recovery mode to run custom software. So they protected the backdoor with an airtight cryptographic lock. The BootROM was programmed to read the incoming payload, check it against Nvidia's private master encryption key, and immediately reject it if the digital signature didn't match. It was an industrial-grade security gate. But the programmers who wrote the BootROM code made a fundamental first-year computer science mistake in how that gate handled incoming data. To understand the mistake, you have to look at how a computer manages its short-term memory. When you send a payload to the Tegra X1 chip in recovery mode, the incoming data is copied into a temporary storage space in memory called a buffer. Before the chip copies the data, the BootROM asks a very simple question: how large is this file? The programmer's job is to make sure the chip reads that file size, verifies that it fits inside the designated storage buffer, and stops reading if the file is too big. But in the Tegra X1's BootROM code, the length check was completely broken. Hackers discovered that if they sent a specially crafted data packet and lied to the chip about its length, specifying an impossibly, absurdly massive size, the BootROM wouldn't reject it. It would blindly keep copying the incoming data, byte by byte, straight past the boundaries of the temporary storage buffer. This is a classic argument length buffer overflow. Imagine pouring a gallon of water into a tiny teacup. The water doesn't just fill the cup, it spills out across the table, soaking everything around it. In a computer, that spilling data flows directly into neighboring memory sectors, overwriting critical system data and, crucially, overwriting the CPU's execution stack pointer. By carefully arranging the data inside their oversized payload, hackers didn't just crash the chip, they accurately rewrote the processor's active instructions in real time. They forced the CPU to skip the entire cryptographic digital signature check altogether. The security gate didn't get picked open, it was completely drowned. The moment the buffer overflowed, the chip stopped asking for Nintendo or Nvidia's permission. It simply executed whatever code the hackers sent it, with absolute, unrestricted kernel-level access to the entire machine. But this discovery created an immense, frustrating physical roadblock for the hacking community. To execute this buffer overflow, you had to get the chip into USB recovery mode first, and on a retail, factory-locked Nintendo Switch sitting in a consumer's living room, there was no recovery mode button on the outside casing. Nintendo had hidden the hardware triggers deep inside the system architecture. The back door was unlocked, but the hackers still couldn't reach the handle, until they looked down the right-hand controller rail. To make the Switch work as a modular hybrid, Nintendo designed two detachable Joy-Con controllers that slide smoothly onto heavy plastic and metal rails on either side of the screen. To pass button inputs, power, and data between the main console and the controller while docked, Nintendo placed a tiny strip of 10 golden connection pins at the absolute bottom of the right-hand controller rail. A group of independent security researchers and hobbyist hackers, including an elite hardware hacking collective known as Team Fail0verflow, started methodically testing every single one of those 10 pins. They hooked them up to logic analyzers, mapped the voltage fluctuations, and traced where the circuit lines traveled on the motherboard inside the shell. And that's when they hit absolute gold. They discovered that pin 10, the very last pin on the inside edge of the right rail, was tied directly to a hardware line on the Tegra X1 chip responsible for grounding. Nvidia's original design documentation for the chip specified that if this specific grounding line was held down to a low voltage state while the processor was experiencing a cold boot, meaning a startup from a completely powered off state, the chip would bypass its standard boot cycle entirely. It would get tricked into believing it was sitting on a factory diagnostics bench, and it would plunge instantly into USB recovery mode. All a hacker had to do was physically link pin 10 to a metal ground source on the console, hold down the physical volume up button on the top shell, and press the power button. The barrier was no longer a digital wall of encryption keys and mathematical equations. It was a physical gap of less than a single millimeter between two metal contacts. Suddenly, the underground community entered a frantic race to build the simplest, cheapest hardware tool to bridge that gap. Some people opened up their Joy-Cons and soldered tiny micro-switches inside. Others wrapped small strips of kitchen tin foil around the bottom of the controller rail. Some used 3D printers to manufacture precise plastic jigs holding a tiny sliver of copper wire. But the method that achieved legendary status across the internet was the simplest one imaginable: a standard household metal paperclip. You took the paperclip, straightened it out with a pair of pliers, and bent it into a tight, sharp U-shape. You slid the wire down the groove of the right-hand controller rail until the metal tips resting at the bottom physically touched pin 10 and bridged it to the outer metal casing of the rail, which acted as a natural ground. You held the volume up button. You clicked power. The Nintendo Switch screen stayed completely black. To an average user, it looked like the console was completely dead or out of battery. But if you plugged a standard USB-C cable from the bottom of the Switch into a nearby laptop, a new hardware alert would instantly pop up on your computer desktop: Nvidia USB recovery mode connected. The multi-billion-dollar fortress had been breached by a piece of office stationery. In April 2018, the security researchers publicly released their exploit code to the world under the name Fusee, Gelee, which translates from French to frozen rocket. The announcement caused absolute pandemonium at Nintendo's corporate headquarters in Kyoto. The panic wasn't just because the console had been hacked, it was because of the terrifying, unchangeable nature of a BootROM vulnerability. When a hacker finds a bug in a console's operating system, the manufacturer can quickly write a patch, compile a new firmware update, force every console to download it over Wi-Fi, and close the loop. It's a game of cat and mouse, but the manufacturer always retains the ultimate hammer. But with Fusee Gelee, Nintendo was completely weaponless. The flaw lived in the physical, read-only silicon gates of the Nvidia chip. It was physically impossible for a software update to fix it. If a user accepted Nintendo's newest system update, whether it was firmware version 5.0, 8.0, or 11.0, it didn't matter. The paperclip exploit occurred the exact microsecond the hardware turned on, running its buffer overflow and seizing control of the processor before Nintendo's operating system even woke up from sleep. The hacker's custom code would simply patch the operating system in memory as it loaded, stripping away Nintendo's security layers before they could even initialize. Every single one of the roughly 15 million Nintendo Switch consoles already manufactured and sitting in retail warehouses, store shelves, and living rooms across the globe was permanently, irreversibly open to the world. Nintendo had spent years designing a secure platform, only to realize they had spent hundreds of millions of dollars manufacturing a hardware flaw they could never take back. The only way for Nintendo to stop the bleeding was a massive, incredibly expensive logistical pivot. They had to work directly with Nvidia to redesign the physical silicon fabrication process inside the factories. They had to create a brand new hardware revision of the Tegra X1 chip, internally codenamed Mariko, that physically cleared the buffer length check in the silicon gates before shipping new units to stores. This created a legendary, permanent dividing line in the gaming community. To this day, early Nintendo Switch models are known as V1 unpatched consoles. They are highly prized, sought-after pieces of hardware on the secondary market because they remain permanently open to homebrew software, custom operating systems, Linux emulation, and backup software, requiring nothing more than a simple physical jig to unlock. Nintendo built an incredible digital castle, but they forgot a fundamental rule of cybersecurity. A castle is only as strong as the physical ground it is built on. By outsourcing their core processing architecture to an off-the-shelf component to save time and money, they inherited a physical vulnerability they had no power to change. They trusted a third-party chip implicitly, and a simple, overlooked coding error in a factory recovery routine turned their flagship console into an open playground for human curiosity. It proves that in the world of high-stakes technology, complexity is always the enemy of security. The most sophisticated cryptographic walls on Earth mean absolutely nothing if you can simply walk up to the back door, slide a 5-cent piece of wire into the hinge, and command the gate to open. If this deep dive kept you hooked and brought you some value today, please drop a like on the video and leave a comment below letting me know what legendary piece of hardware or corporate security disaster we should break down next. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button before you go so you catch our very next upload the moment it drops. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.